So today we're going to be talking about game design documentation. I had originally planned to, way back when I did the planning for the course, I had originally thought that we would focus more on the UML and sort of the use of documentation for analysis and design work. And I'm finding, just based on the conversations I've been having with you and some of the things that are coming up, the UML stuff might not be the most valuable right now because UML is great when you're really deep into programming problems and building out uh, really intense discrete interactivity stuff. But when it comes to a more holistic way of thinking about the coding of a game or game level, I think it's better for us to focus on the game design document itself. So this whole session is going to be all about talking through what a game design document is and what its purpose is and why we care about it. And so in conjunction with this video, I'm also going to either interlace or just provide the slides, and then you can kind of look at them and switch back and forth because you'll be able to pause me, look at the slide, restart me, look, pause me again, whatever. You can do your switching. So there you go. What I've got is a title slide that says Game Design Documentation, How to Communicate Your Game Ideas to Various Audience Types. And so slide one, if you just advance to the next slide, you'll see a list here of the items we'll talk about. Why do we need to communicate? We need to, we'll get into the sort of rationale behind what communication is supposed to do. Know, knowing your audience and being able to understand how to communicate with the appropriate audience group using the appropriate vocabularies and whatnot. The Goldilocks variable of communication. So looking a little bit at the just right level of communication. The living document, scope creep in an agile world, and then next steps. So the living document essentially is the ability to collaborate or update an ongoing document. The nice thing about modern tools like Google Docs and even now Word is that we can have a running revision list of the changes that get made to a document over time. And it's not, it's interesting because track changes in a Word document is really great when you're going through an editing process. But if you're working with a tool like Google Docs, that iterative, ongoing aspect of it, it's not so much we're tracking the changes as it is this is the latest version of the document, and you can look at any previous version you want. It's a little bit of a different way of thinking about it. So the living document, we'll talk a bit about that. And then scope creep in an agile world. Agile being that sort of iterative way of going about building something, starting with a small minimum viable product and then continuing to build it out. And then how do you maintain scope? How do you make sure that you're staying on target and delivering what you had intended to, and not gone off in some bizarre direction and suddenly found yourself making something completely different from what you originally started out to do. Finally, with next steps, we're going to look at the tools, both professional and non-professional tools that i.e. Tools that are free and tools that cost money, the commercial side, and what those tools can do to help you. Okay, cool. So let's look at the slide that is why we get gunk on my shoulder. Now I'm gonna be paranoid about it. I'm just gonna stare at it every time I look at myself. Okay, why do we need to communicate? Well, communications within a team, so the intrinsic internal communications, um, gets everyone on the same page, literally. We're all looking at the same document, and it gives everyone a starting place for new ideas or new solutions to problems that might not have been solved. And it allows you to do sort of that ongoing check-in on are we building the thing that we said we were going to build. Um, the the communications can communicate and should communicate both the minimum viable product, the current iteration of what the MVP is, as well as the sort of longer term vision of what the overall project is. So we've got our vertical slice looking at here's what we're able to deliver, and we're working on delivering within the next week, but it's the week 4 of a 30-week process. So we know that there's going to be something that will come after that minimum viable product. We don't sort of stop at week 4 and go done. We want to keep that iteration going and growing. And then also it provides a tool for that check-in, so that you don't, as a team, you don't end up creating unintentional scope creep, because that can be a real pain. I've done it to myself where I'm just like, oh, this is an interesting way to go, and we just have so many false starts. We never get anything done, and lots of really great ideas, but no actual conclusion to any of those ideas. So that becomes a thing. When it comes to documentation for the client, you'll often hear the client, the funder, or the producer in game stuff. The producer is in the role of sort of being the publishing company. Has producers who keep an eye on the studios and the work that they do, and their job as the producer is to figure out what are you going to deliver to us, and then how will we monetize that. So typically it's the bang for your buck, right? How do you communicate to those who are paying you the money and giving you the time to be able to create a thing? How do you sort of justify the time you've spent, the energy and the effort and whatnot? And that's where things can get tricky, because suddenly the game design document can't be the internal vocabulary that is shared by the group. It has to be a public-facing vocabulary that people who aren't in the process, they need to be able to read it and understand and be able to respond intelligently to it and not have a panic attack. It also makes it possible to evaluate client suggestions. Clients are as notorious as internal developers with their excitement and enthusiasm for new things, and so you need to help them understand that changes to the scope can increase cost, increase time, increase risk of breaking the system. You got a nice stable system going, and somebody wants to introduce something that's completely new. You need to test it and see if it's actually going to fit. Then ultimately it gives you some sort of way to say, okay, well, we agreed on this design document, we all signed off on it. Now you're introducing a change. You can't just expect that change to happen for free. It has to be something that happens with some added time and added funds and those sorts of things. So the communications, the documentation that we create as we go can really help the dialogue with your team members and also with your clients. Some of you have been emailing me with the documentation right in the email. That's completely legitimate. it is legitimate because sometimes clients won't read documents that you send them. They will read the email, especially if you are concise and you get to the point, and you share with them exactly what they need to know when they need to know it. We actually had a client that never read documentation, but we would send a summary of the project, what had happened, where we were at, what was happening next, and we just send that on a weekly, sometimes daily basis, depending on how much stuff was happening and how intense all that was. So if we were in an intense period of production, we'd definitely send out updates as regularly as necessary. Um, so that whole thing is really really powerful. Um, and again, we'll look at what the tools are. Um, of course, you wouldn't use email for your own organization. You'd be copying and pasting your document elements out of your document and pasting them into the email that you share with the client. So, anyways, looking at why would you do it, even if you're just doing a project for yourself? Well, it is a way of keeping your future self in line by being as clear as you can with your own documentation. You can set a timeline on the work you're doing. You can set a scope, so you know what your features are. If you're able to pay yourself, great, fantastic. And then ultimately, if you do keep documentation, even on those personal projects that you're working on, they become a really powerful asset in your portfolio. So you can take that and say, well, here's a personal project I was working on. Here's all the documentation I created for it. This is what you would get if you hired me and paid me to build your game for you. Yay! Wouldn't that be cool? So yeah, figure out how much documentation. It's the most boring and the most tedious part of a process, but it is, it can be useful in getting work. So something to think about. So knowing your audience, um, we we talk about knowing your audience, but what does that really boil down to? Well, a design document, you can have multiple types of people reading it, and so you may need to rewrite sections of the document or create the client version or client chapter of your document, depending on the size of the project, the duration of the project. Um, it's there's going to be the stuff that you keep internal to the team, and then there's going to be the stuff that you want to share with others on your clients and whatnot. We can also look at having a developer version that is primarily focused on the code aspects of the project, and then the designer version, the designer view. When I sort of think about the document and the game design document, in a lot of ways, it's the word version of the ultimate object, the thing that we're going to make, and so there are multiple ways of viewing that object that we're going to create. And so by taking the developer's filter on it and seeing all of the aspects that fit into the developer's way of thinking and their priorities and the things they care about, and then saying, okay, well, here's the designer view. These are all the things the designers care about. And then if you've got a section where you can say, well, here's how it all fits together. Sorry, I'm using all media in the design part, so even the animators and the concept artists and those folks are I'm throwing into that big bucket of design, not just user interface or those sorts of things. So just bear in mind that I'm for the moment I'm just using developer and designers as those two sort of delineators. And then, of course, you've got take a top view that might be the client, producer, stakeholder version that is sort of looking at the thing much more plain language, no jargon, no anything that will confuse anyone. Um, and then finally, there may be a version of the document very late in the process that starts to read more like a technical manual and a strategy for, well, how are you going to test the game, and what are the things you need to know about the game. In fact, as you build your game, that game design document can actually become the building blocks of the actual user manual that you might need to create to help players understand how to play the game. So the documentation serves a role all the way through, from the very inception, the very beginning of the project, all the way through to its completion and launch. The uh, and if there's a consistency from these very various perspectives on all this, that the core ideas are not coming into conflict with one another, then you're on the right track. But if if one view doesn't quite jive with another view, then you may need to rethink, well, why, and are we maybe not on the same page with what we think we're doing. Um, and getting all those perspectives, the feedback, especially from the different perspectives, looking at the object before it's even built, and getting that feedback on it is really, really powerful. So it's a good thing to do. It's hard to do, but it is a good thing to do. So the Goldilocks quotient, component, aspect, thing. Um, just like the character in Goldilocks and the Three Bears, she's looking for just right, and that's what we're looking for when we're creating our documentation. Is we want to communicate uh, just enough, not too much and not too little. Too much can paint us in a corner, and we can be on the hook to deliver things that aren't realistic or deliverable. And it's too little can have the opposite effect. If we're too vague, that leaves the client open to let their imagination run wild, and they can really start to come up with some crazy ideas about what they think they're going to get. And you remember I told the story about, you know we can use the same word for a thing, like a deck, a backyard deck. But man, there's so many different kinds of decks, multi-level decks, decks with jacuzzis in them, you know, all the way to the simplest deck, a wooden rectangle with a set of stairs on it. So, so even though we're using the same words and we all agree on a definition, yep, a backyard deck, I know what that is. Maybe you don't. Maybe you do. You know what it is, but what we're actually building might not match your vision. So that sort of that balance, it's not a hard and fast rule. It's about making sure and checking in and asking questions of everyone on the team to tell them back to you what they think the project is, and what they think the deliverables will be, and then trying to do your best to modify that and capture the interesting. Maybe they come up with something you hadn't thought of before, but it's really good and it's worth keeping. So you go, I hadn't thought of that. Let's keep it. Um, and as with all things, the clearer you can be, the more specific you can be, the the happier everyone will be. So that's why typically we would never want to forecast too far, more than a week into a project, because we can wave our hands in the air about what's going to happen in 3 months, but we don't know what intervening things will occur, and so we can say, well, we're gonna hit the mark, we're gonna hit the target, but that target might shift and it might change, and so we're going to be clear about, we're making a thing, and this is what we think the thing is, and here's how we're going to get there, and that's about as precise as you want to get. I know it sounds really vague, but that's the way it is. So working with a living document, the trick with a living document is that you want to either have a tool where you know the versions or the revisions will be easily accessible and you can get back to a previous version of the document, um, or you save versions of the document. You know, you actually put a version number into the file name, which I've done in the past as well, because uh, you can always say to the client, okay, we're on version 21 here. Make sure that that's the document you're looking at today, because we've added some things and made some changes, and so just if you don't have version 21, let me know and I'll send it to you. It it also allows you to have a record of this is what we agreed to and signed off on. So if suddenly you're dealing with someone who says, no, 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 we agreed to this crazy thing that I suggested and nobody nodded their head to, um, you have some kind of verifiable uh, way of saying, oh, well, this is what we agreed on this date, right? And so having those version numbers available is really powerful. Um, and and as I say to all my students, don't say no, say more do. So if there are new things that are coming in and there is some scope creep happening, identify it, acknowledge that it's a shift and a change, celebrate that. That's great. We're gonna improve the product. Yay, that's awesome. It is going to impact the timeline and it is going to impact the budget. So uh, yay. Don't say no, say more do. The flip side is you also want to make sure that the client is agreeing to these sorts of changes in scope, so that they are aware that they're not going to find themselves doubling the budget, and not getting double the features, because we know that, right? You can double the budget, but depending on where you're at in the project, it may only get you 20% more of the end product. So the older the project is, the more expensive it becomes to kind of extend it out. So there you go. And essentially the living document is a way of talking about, we're going to be tracking this and we're going to be following it along, and we don't expect this to be a static one-off document that we just sort of treat like the Bible, and we want to see it change and grow, but we will need to sometimes refer back to previous versions. So that's something. Scope creep in an agile world. It seems like it's a bit of an oppositional thing when you say, well, scope creep is a way of not adding new things, and agile is a way of adding new things. So yeah, you want to have definitely the scope creep thing. You need to keep an eye on that, and you need to make sure that the agile process isn't taking you off the path of where you want to take the project. And if it does, then you need to make sure that everybody's on board with, oh, we're not going to go to these islands in the ocean. We're going to go to these islands in the ocean. And it's a major course correction. And it's an intentional course correction. So that's, again, being aware of that is important. Agile allows you to always scope and work within a realistic window of deliverables and managing expectations, especially when you're dealing with things where you're building something that's never been built before. If we were just building a website, that's a really well-known domain. That's a really well-known area. There's processes, there's templates, there's tools, there's systems, there's everything around how to build a website. So scoping it, planning it based on the amount of content that's in it, and based on the content management system for it, you can get pretty clear on what the end result will be, and the client already typically knows what's involved in getting there, or at least knows what they want. That's the other problem that you run into, is that clients, when they're building new software or even a new game environment, they have an idea, but there's so much of the creative work that you can't really know until it gets built, that whether or not it's a good thing. So you use your best intuition, your best guess, and you all agree to go in a particular direction. And hopefully that MVP process will, it'll add just enough so that if you go off track, you've only gone off track by a little bit. You can bring it back and take a step back to that previous iteration if it goes off track, and reassess, reiterate, and then hopefully stay on track. One thing that I talked about in the past is the idea of the parking lot. I like to build into all of my documentation an area in the living document that is the parking lot. That is the thing that no ideas are bad ideas. They're just not realistic. They're not feasible for the scope of the project. And so, understanding that, okay, well, we're going to have to mitigate some of this, and some of these features may have to come in a version 2 or another production process, and so we need to we'll have to put it in the parking lot. And that's what I'll do with the client, is saying, okay, great idea, parking lot, we can talk about that, and let's get through these major pieces. And if there's time at the end, there rarely is, but if there's time at the end, we can revisit the parking lot and see how important some of those other features are. So next steps, and talking a bit about, this is the point at which you're going to look at the slide, because I have 2 links in there that are for 2 different templates. These templates are incredibly comprehensive and probably have more detail in them than you will need for your particular projects, but they're there. They're available for you to tap into should you need them, and there's a ton of stuff out on the web. There's links and whatnot. Just Google game design documents. Gamasutra is a really great web resource. Some of it's old. There's a blog post from 2006, still legit, still usable, but something to consider. So there's 2 templates in here that will both serve you well. They're very self-explanatory. They've got a table of contents and some sample content in them, and they'll allow you to really sort of chow down on what you've already been doing, and give you a way of writing it up so that it's something that other people can read and make sense of. I also wanted to include in there, sorry, I made a note that are templates good? Yes. Are they bad? Yes. And really what it boils down to is they're good because they can be a really great tool. Don't overdo it, because they may have pieces of the game design document that you really just don't need. And so you don't need it. Edit it out. Get rid of it. There will be obvious things that you want to always include, like the story of the game and those sorts of things. But ultimately, there will be pieces that just don't make sense for whatever project you're working on. So the advanced tools, there are tools out there. One that I haven't really used, but I'm curious about it, called Hack and Plan. It's the second web link in there. They're both commercial tools, so you have to sign up for them, pay for them. But if you're working on a team, this can become a real lifesaver. So Hack and Plan actually uses the Trello, which is an agile form of documentation called Kanban, Kanban, which actually originated in Japan for the automotive industry, and they actually used index cards to sort of manage tasks within there, and it was a productivity tool. Even before the notion of agile came along, this was something that they were using for their own systems. And so yeah, that this Hack and Plan will use that Kanban mode, which is Trello, which we've talked about before, and then we'll actually spit out from all that work, spit out a version of a game design document for you to be able to present to a client or whatever. So it keeps it in working mode for a team to be able to compare notes and assign tasks and review work being done. And then you can take a slice and spit out a game design document for a client as a report, as an update. The other tool is ZenHub, which software developers use. I know some professional friends of mine have been using it for some of their software development work. And it actually, what it does is it combines, again, that sort of Kanban Trello style management, but actually attaches code pieces to these Kanban elements that then turn into code that gets stored in a repository, in a GitHub repository. So any changes that you make on the code get an iteration of whatever gets updated on the card, so that you're always able to go back to your Trello environment, see what's been done by who and where things are at, get a sort of high level overview, pick a card out, open up the code, work on it, submit it, do whatever you need to do. And so that's a cool thing. So I've been talking for about half hour here, and my hope is that you'll be able to take a look at the two templates as examples that are there, and then use them to help you sort of write up the documentation that you want for your project. I know each of you have different stages that you're at in your final project. Some of you are more focused on a deliverable, others are working more on the concept design side of things. What I care about is, let's capture all of that thinking, let's put all of that stuff into a document, and I will behave like the client and assess, so do I think you know where you're going with this? And if I do, great. I'm going to wear two hats when I read the document. The hat of the client, of course, is can I understand it from a client perspective? And the other hat that I'll wear is if I was your team lead or your sort of your guide, your mentor on this, am I feeling confident about what you think you're going to be able to accomplish in the next few weeks as we move through the last few classes and look forward to a launch party of some sort in early December. And again, launch is a nice sort of open word, so don't panic. Launch is everything from those who are working on a deliverable all the way through to those who are working on a concept and are looking at something that is more pitchable, prototypable thing. So again, I'm mostly what I'm most interested in seeing from you is evidence of your thinking, and can you convey it in a way that I can understand. Cool. So send me your email questions and whatnot. Again, sorry I couldn't be there today, but we'll see you next week. Take it easy.